Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of SNXweave's panel-style podcast for Spartan Council candidates. Once again, in collaboration with you, the community, we asked our panel members a total of 10 questions that produced thoughtful responses and enthusiastic discussions. Keep listening to hear your Spartan Council candidates introduce themselves, speak to their candidacy, and answer hard-hitting questions about representing synthetics. In this episode, we'll hear from current council members Danijel, Jackson, Kain, and Michael. Since the recording of the panel interview, Jackson announced that he will not be running this epoch in order to focus on the synthetics futures development and V2X roadmap. He is still included in the panel, however, as his portion of the discussion remains necessary to the other panel members' comments. So let's hear what they had to say. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first question, what unique experiences or views do you bring to the Spartan Council? And once again, for this first question, please start out with a brief introduction of yourself. Danijel, you'll be answering first.
All right, thanks. So I wouldn't say I bring a unique attribute to the council. Maybe I bring a combination of unique qualities. I come from community. I've been with synthetics since Heaven days, so since like 2018, I think it was. Bought it on KuCoin, stuck around, was very active in Discords. Since I joined, since I first bought Heaven, and I've got some popularity with making some Discord bots in Discord. Somehow it got me elected into the first epoch, and somehow I'm still here. I'm just always doing my best, always trying to do the extra mile for synthetics to give a bit extra. I'm using my know-how, which is more, I guess, technical software development than financial, to just help by making some tools, some sites, some bots. Right now I've had the good luck, good fortune to be chosen by SDAO to take on the binary options module with dailies, and it seems to be going very well. We released the token, so there's always alignment, even though I don't need it per se, to always do my best for synthetics. And being in the council kind of allows me to just make sure both synthetics and the projects spinning out of synthetics are always aligned.
That's awesome, Danijel. Thank you. It's great having your knowledge since you've been on the council from the start. Okay, Kain, floor is yours. What unique views or experiences do you bring to the Spartan Council? And again, if you could please just start with a brief introduction.
Yep, thank you. I am the founder of Havens, and then obviously pivoting into synthetics. Started the project back in like late 2016 through 2017. I was part of the initial foundation back in the centralized days, and have been pushing for this kind of movement towards decentralized governance basically since the beginning. So I think the unique perspective that I bring is a lot of the history of why things are the way they are, for good or ill, as well as that kind of that drive towards decentralization and handing over power. I guess as the former semi-benevolent dictator, that's my role to play, and I'm hoping to kind of stick around on the council for the near future until we can get the governance process into a position where everyone feels like it's self-sustaining and doesn't necessarily require my daily input.
Hey, thank you very much, Kain. I'm sure the community appreciates your vision for a decentralized governance structure within synthetics, and also, of course, your history with synthetics. Michael, floor is yours. Same question, please.
Hey, so I'm Michael, one of the co-founders of Framework Ventures. We invested in SNX token in September of 2019. So I've been around the project since a little bit before then. We've been actively staking since then, and we have been helping to put forward governance proposals. We've helped build some tooling, and just generally participating in the community. And we will soon be, active traders as well, when layer 2 gets to full resolution. And so we kind of come at most problems from a bunch of different angles, being both active stakers and eventually traders, but also stewards and participants. And have seen the protocol not as long as Kain has, but definitely have seen some iterations, and so have some historical understanding as well.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for sharing the diversity and experience you bring to the Spartan Council. Thank you, everybody, for those thoughtful responses. For this next part, we want to open the floor for everybody to discuss the diversity of skill sets and experiences that make up the strongest Spartan Council.
So I think historically what we've seen in the various epochs is that there are several different categories of responsibilities that the Spartan Council has. I think a focus on risk and overall, sort of protocol parameters is very valuable. I think we've seen it's quite valuable to have people with a fairly deep technical expertise, at the smart contract level. I think we've also seen that the community side and communication with community and coordinating with the community is pretty critical. And then I think we've seen sort of generally this governance process and evolution of how governance has been structured in synthetics has been very valuable. And I think each of the different, obviously I've only been on the council for one epoch, but watching the various council members over the last several epochs, I've seen that having those capabilities or some of those qualities has been very valuable. Maybe there's some additional ones outside of those, but I think that tends to be primarily where the value has been derived from.
Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, just confirming. I think he phrased it perfectly. We've had that diversity ever since the first epoch. We had guys such as Caleb, always on the edge, always being very risk averse, and then we had people who are just pragmatical. So you also have to think about the product per se. Like you can't just block everything when you smell some danger. So the diversity of people being risk averse, being experts in technology and smart contracts, and then people such as Kain who are just spearheading the governance in the whole DeFi. So I think it's been very well balanced so far. And of course, having OGs and people who are kind of known in the space and have connections, that can always help.
Fully agree with all that's been said before. I think the only thing that I'd add is, as the product surface area of synthetics writ large, and I use that also with the context of some of the other projects that are building on top of synthetics like Lyra, Thales, Aelin. As we start to think about what the actual kind of stakeholder relationship is, we should think about having voices on the council that represent those perspectives as well, because historically it's really been the community and stakers and core contributors as kind of the three main constituents. But I think over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months, we're going to probably see that shift.
Thank you all. Really, really great points. This brings us to question 2. In your own words, please explain what you believe to be your responsibility and obligation as an elected council member of the community. Michael, first response will go to you for this question.
Yeah, so I think Kain touched on this. A lot of the responsibility has been stewarding the network as it goes through the different evolutions and upgrades, being a representative for parameter voting, being a representative for discussing the different upgrade paths, and providing perspective when helpful, given all of our different backgrounds.
Absolutely. The representative structure allows voters to be heard and participate indirectly in the decision-making direction of synthetics as a whole. Danijel, how do you view your role as an elected council member?
Thank you. So I think there's the obvious. An elected council member needs to do the best, to his knowledge, to make sure he votes in the best interest of the protocol on the submitted SCPs and SAPs. So understanding them to the level that's within his capabilities. But I always try to do a bit extra, and I believe everyone should. It's not a job per se. There is no fixed hours, but I believe council members need to be active, need to be present. They need to be engaged in conversations, both in private channels, in meetings, but also keep an ear out to the community. See what's frustrating, see where's lacking communication. Bridge that gap. And also just speak up when we as the council members feel there's not such clarity on the roadmap on where we're headed. So or anything an individual brings to the table. As I said, I bring a bit of software development background more than the finance part per se. So yeah, I try to help in that manner any way I can, or where I see that something can be helpful.
Thank you, Danijel. Yeah, it's pretty clear speaking with this group that a broad range of expertise is required to develop the most effective Spartan Council. Kain, how do you view your role and your responsibility as an elected council member for the community?
I think I take a very literal approach to this question, and my answer is basically that as a Spartan Council member, your role is exclusively to exercise the will of the token holders who have appointed you to the council. And so I think one of the things that is really critical about that is making sure that your token holders and the constituents that have voted you in kind of have a pathway to provide feedback, and that you're engaged with the community. You're kind of getting a temperature check of how people are reacting to things and what the sentiment is, and taking feedback, because we do have an interesting form of sort of delegated democracy where you don't necessarily know who is voting for you, but you can kind of get a sense of the overall sentiment. So I think you're kind of have a responsibility to adhere to the principles that you've stated, but also to keep an ear to the ground and make sure that if the sentiment in the community is shifting or perspectives are changing, that you're aware of that and responsive to it.
Perfect. Thank you, Kain, and thank you to the group. Just a quick follow-up. What are some of the areas you believe that responsibility is most visible in the community, and maybe others where you see there could be some possible improvements?
So one thing that definitely has been, there are some improvements, but the thing I want to point out is just the way council members interact. It's still kind of private. The meetings are still, okay, they are recorded, they are being edited and shared with the community. The channel where we mostly chat is private, and I understand there's perhaps some still, I wouldn't say need, but maybe some higher comfort till we get the hang of it. But yeah, that's something I believe we can just have the community more engaged. Yeah, in those conversations that are not strictly SAP or SCP, related during presentation, but just general conversations.
I agree with that. I think we have tried to kind of push things forward into this, very open and transparent mechanism, and I think the more we can surface, the better. But I do also believe that one of the reasons, when you go back and we look at why we chose this form of governance, why we wanted a council that could act on behalf of token holders and represent their interests, was that we wanted people who had potentially some specialized skills or knowledge or experience that would be able to bring those skills and knowledge to bear. And as much as we're building out in the open, and this is open source software, I do think that there are times where the best interest of the token holders may not be having every single piece of information being surfaced. And I think provided the framework that the decisions are being made under is legitimate, I think that that's okay. I think if token holders accept that there are some conversations that they want to be private conversations, between maybe the core contributors in the Spartan Council, then that is for the token holders to decide. And I think the status quo at the moment is that token holders feel comfortable. When they feel uncomfortable, they usually will raise their voices and say, why are we not hearing more information about this? And they'll request information. But I do think that in principle, you can have an environment where you have had token holders delegate their power to a specialized group of people. And as long as those people must make decisions out in the open, and as long as those decisions are transparent, and I think that we've achieved that with the governance mechanism that we have, then I think it's okay. I think if they're making decisions in the background and there's collusion or things like that, I think it becomes problematic. But the fact that we have a very transparent process for voting on things, for discussing SIPs, etc., I think broadly we're okay. But I do agree with Daniel that I think we should always be trying to put pressure on ourselves to be as transparent as we possibly can, unless absolutely necessary.
If I may respond to that, I also agree that the community would raise their voices should they really feel this is not what they signed up for. But one thing that I think is kind of a side effect of this is that it makes it harder for someone new to join the council. Like if the processes, if the conversations, if the meetings are not like fully transparent, there might be some historical information, some reasoning that a potential new council member was not privy to. So I just think it would make onboarding easier if there was no such private conversation per se.
Yeah, that's a very powerful point. And I think we have seen over the last year, whatever, that it's been a fairly small group of people that have been elected to the council, and there is a lot of incumbency bias as well. So I take that point. I think that's fair counterpoint, and that again, we should be trying to push these things out in the open as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that kind of observation where more incumbent and traditionally the path to really join the council has been to be public guardians and also active community members who's been either has a stake in synthetics or has some kind of interest in synthetics doing well. So I think we've found that if the council is more engaged in obviously the governance, the public governance channels, and engaging with people discussions, and also opening up more of the discussion in the public channels, I think that would we would be getting more community engagement and potential pathway for obviously new council members to join and step up. So yeah, I think that's something we've noticed, that it's been harder to get into the council for new people.
Yeah, one suggestion is maybe just leveraging the council chambers conversation channel, more so than we have in the past, but also making it clear sort of the decision-making and processes, or just finding more ways to record conversations that we're having.
Thank you, everyone. Really, really great dialogue there. You all brought up some very interesting points. Moving on to question 3. What do you want to see achieved by the council in the short to mid-term, as well as the long term, for the synthetics protocol? And what will your contribution be? Jackson, question 3 will go to you first.
Thank you. So in the kind of medium term, what I would like to see the council do is be suggesting more how governance could improve. So working on the kind of decentralized governance framework. So I think that's been a lot of that has been spearheaded by Kain, but I would like to see the council get behind that as well and look at improvements, how that could be improved. And in governance, I mean, like obviously we've seen at the start going to a decentralized council meant that decisions did slow down a bit. And how does the project, like I guess project management, also slowed down a bit because of kind of like you have decentralized decision making. So I would like to see the council get more involved in the project management and like roadmap how looking at how synthetics can build core products and be competitive in the DeFi space in the medium term. And so that's kind of what I see as important.
Thank you for your thoughts on this, Jackson. Daniel, floor is yours. Question 3 to you.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, I'm very glad Jackson's answer was as it was. I kind of have a similar point of view, and I didn't want it to be taken as a kind of a criticism towards anyone. I feel there's still room for the council and core contributors to kind of align, to have more transparency, specifically from the council towards the conversations that happen between core contributors, the overall roadmap. I think we're making progress, but I wouldn't be comfortable saying that it's the council that's kind of driving the project management. Maybe that's not what the council should be doing, but it should at least have a clear vision and not be per se on the receiving end. So being more active and maybe having even a better connection and transparency with the core contributors.
Thank you, Daniel. Your point on transparency is well taken. It's definitely a goal to continue striving for. Kain, please share your thoughts on what you hope to achieve in the short, medium, and long term for the Synthetics protocol.
I think in the medium term, my goal is to help. I've got a couple, but help primarily to ensure that the core contributor structure is in place to allow us to wrap up the V2X scope and to transition to V3 as smoothly as possible. And I think that we're getting there. And then I think the secondary one, which is more medium term to long term, is ensuring that we have the right governance structures to last for the next 2 to 3 years. I think there's been a lot of iteration in governance and a lot of experimentation in our governance processes, and I think we've got a lot of information and feedback from those processes that we've implemented over the last year, and I think we're in a really good position to put something in place in V3 governance that will, be will require less kind of continual change. I think we can put something in place that's a little bit more stable, that people can be, confident will kind of continue on in the longer term, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I think that the process of both building that, deploying it, and then making it open source and available to the community is a pretty huge part of the role that I'm hoping to play over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you, Kain. Maintaining that longer-term view is pivotal for keeping the focus on the strategic objectives of Synthetics. Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
So I really like all the answers so far, and I hope to be able to, as a Spartan Council member, help with the bridging of the governance models becoming the norms and having to be more of a steady process of either these elections and groups leading the governance of Synthetics. I think the things that I would add are in the short term, to kind of Kain's point about V2X, helping to either provide assets or provide liquidity, continue staking, provide perspectives on getting to things like layer 2, active trading participation, continuing to stake, bridging, assets from layer 1 to layer 2. Medium term, which I would consider to be 3 months plus, is taking that and expanding it and scaling that to whichever direction is most helpful that framework can help provide.
Thanks, Michael. All excellent points. This brings us to question 4. Do you believe the 3-month epoch is effective for all the DAOs and councils to be able to achieve long-term objectives? Does this allow for the continuity of vision and execution? And should the serving term be slightly increased? Kain, we'll hear your thoughts on this one first.
Oof, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a doozy.
I mean, if the OGs will recall, I was a proponent of the chaotic liquid democracy style governance, where you might serve for 10 minutes or 10 hours and be booted off unceremoniously. So I think that the compromise that we came up with was 3 months. I do think that 3 months in crypto is a very long time still, and I think it does kind of strike a balance between ensuring that we have responsive council members and having continuity. I think if you push it much beyond 3 months and you have a council member that begins to perform poorly or whatever, the only real recourse that we have is kind of dilution of that council member, or some kind of process to basically trigger a re-election of the entire council. And so I think that extending the duration of each council beyond 3 months, to me, feels a little bit dangerous right now. I think we've kind of got the sweet spot as it is. In fact, I would probably argue that even shorter versions, obviously voter fatigue notwithstanding, but shorter durations could be more optimal.
Thank you, Kain, for sharing your views, and especially the history of the 3-month epoch. Jackson, let's hear your thoughts on this.
I see where Kain comes from. Really, initially it was a total liquid, chaotic kind of governance where anyone could be voted out at any time based on the token holders' kind of will. And in that 3 months kind of at the moment, an epoch really hits that sweet spot where community, like the council members, get a good time to understand the system protocol and have their input, and it feels like longer kind of period epochs would generally be not as effective. And if there's really a mechanism already where they can stand for re-election after that 3 months, if there's kind of like especially for some of the other DAOs, the Ambassador DAO and the Grants DAO, we've seen members, they're working on particular projects, or they would like to see some project that they're working on come to fruition. So they would then stand for re-election. So there's mechanisms to handle that already where they can stand for re-election. And generally, people who's been doing a good job, we've seen token holders re-elect them. So if we mandate a longer epoch, that might not be the best.
Thank you, Jackson. Seems like you and Kain take the same position on the 3-month epoch. Daniel, what are your thoughts?
Thanks. I actually love this question, and there's a bit of history to that. I was very much opposed to the liquid democracy. I get the high level picture, but I was saying since the start, these are people need time. There are always learning curves. There's adaptations periods. So I also thought, to be honest, that 3 months will be, not enough. It doesn't seem to be a problem. So from the empirical point of view, it seems to have worked well. That said, a lot of council members have been around through more epochs. So it's hard to kind of take a good sample. There have been some that have been only in a single epoch or so. So to cut the long story short, so I think 3 epochs works very well. I would be very much opposed to making it shorter. I think it just creates fatigue in both voters, both candidates. There's a whole process behind it. I feel quarterly is optimal right now. So it seems to be working quite well.
Thank you, Daniel. If I'm understanding your point correctly, it's important to keep voter fatigue at a minimum to maintain the levels of engagement from the voters and the SNX community at large. Michael, please go ahead with your response to this question.
Yeah, I agree that it does not need to be changed right now. I was also not supportive of having it be less than 3 months, given the back and forth of voting. I think we see this in voter turnout, and maybe there's things we can do to increase voter turnout. But I think continuity is important, and understanding people's perspectives is important. And that only builds with continuity. So for now, I think this is good, and would need to see some more evidence to change it upwards or downwards.
Thank you, everybody. That brings us to the halfway point of our panel interview. Moving on to question number 5. Where do you see the synthetics protocol fitting into the DeFi space going forward? Michael, I'll be calling on you first to answer this question.
So I think there's a few different ways that I see synthetics working into the rest of the DeFi space. The first and foremost is synthetic asset creation. SUSD, I think, is one of the purest decentralized stablecoins out there, yet it's not as widely adopted as I would like to see. And some of the other assets, I think, are also very useful in terms of having permissionless representation like SBTC on Ethereum. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is permissionless trading, being able to have a trading mechanism that doesn't limit for whatever reason, I think is a very, very valuable opportunity. And I think the third is really product innovation in terms of how trade execution happens. We call it infinite slippage now, based on some of the conversation and some of the SIPs, I think that might be changing, but having best execution might be the best way to think about it going forward. And that's the part that I get really excited about it over the long run. I know it's going to be a while, but best execution for trading is a pretty even more powerful concept.
Thank you, Michael, for your perspective and the important points you brought up. Daniel, if you would, please share your thoughts on this topic.
Thanks. I think Michael had a perfect answer, and to maybe touch more, in more detail on the SUSD being more widespread with the projects that have spun out of synthetics or are within the ecosystem are using SUSD. However, there are issues with liquidity, with bridging to L2, so that's definitely something we need to work on to improve. Wrappers seem to be a very good way to get more supply while also kind of helping with the depth skew. SUSD has been and will be the only collateral on Talis, even though the community is demanding or asking for collaterals that are more available. I feel SUSD is the only real decentralized stablecoin in the space and should get a much wider adaptation. And apart from that, also what Michael said about making the trading experience smoother, something I might not be fully seeing eye to eye with what the current direction is the cutting the offer short in terms of available SYNs. I always have seen synthetics that's what it was to me. Like you can synthesize everything. So the way I saw synthetics was, an ability to, in one place, buy all the things you could, like Wall Street so that's something, I guess, regulatory wise having a bit of issues there, but I'd be keen, or even what was mentioned by community, that you can make your own indexes and something like that.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, you bring up a good point. The regulatory trends will be important to monitor as things evolve. Continuing with question 5, Jackson, what are your thoughts on this?
I think in the future where synthetics really in DeFi is, the more use cases obviously for SUSD as a stable coin. It's one of the most, it's probably the most decentralized pure asset at the moment. The kind of adoption of SUSD in more use cases and protocols would kind of make synthetics be a settlement layer where combined with better products, and I think crucially the exchange improve. So in the short, I think in the medium term, we're going to see the exchange instead of infinite liquidity, we're going to move to better market making kind of mechanisms, which would make the exchange more fair. So, but still having the best price execution, but more fair for the stakers, and which would include then all the different synthetic assets that we issue from synthetics like SBTC, SETH, as they get used by more of the ecosystem. We would hope to see more than trading volume come through, which would come naturally from this adoption of the different synthetic assets that is issued by synthetics. So that's where I see synthetics, growing in the kind of like short term to medium term, like getting more use with different protocols, and which then would lead down to synthetics being or a settlement layer or exchange layer.
Thank you, Jackson. And as the final responder for question 5, Kain, the floor is yours.
I think this is the reason why there's so many different answers to this question, is indicative of how long it's taken us to get our shit together and really be able to deliver a working product. I know on some level, we've got since integrated into, maybe hundreds of DeFi protocols at this point. SUSD is critical within Curve and Uniswap and a bunch of other places, and I think that's really valuable. But I don't think that it is sort of capturing economic activity and delivering a differentiated service in the way that we were really hoping to, when we initially launched the project. And we've continually been on the cusp of being able to deliver this thing, and we've been blocked for various reasons. But I think that we're now very close to being able to deliver a synthetic perpetual futures platform that will be able to compete with centralized offerings while maintaining all of the things that people love about DeFi. So, composability and censorship resistance and, non-custodial and all of those things. And I think that just hasn't been possible. And so while it's frustrating that it's taking this long to get here, we've delivered a whole bunch of amazing things along the way, a very robust governance framework and, a whole bunch of infrastructure improvements and various things. But I do think that we're now about to kind of reach an inflection point where synthetics will be the dominant perpetual futures platform within layer 2 scaling, which I think a lot of the activity is going to happen on Optimism. My views change a little bit now, in that I think that there will probably be quite a bit of activity across both Optimism and Arbitrum, and maybe some other L2s that are going to emerge. But I do think within that new layer 2 DeFi ecosystem, in terms of perpetual futures, synthetics has a very good chance of dominating that space. And I think that is primarily what people are going to know synthetics for, in 6 months or 12 months time.
Thank you, Kain, and thank you to the group for your responses to question 5. Jackson, question 6 will go to you first. What do you believe synthetics multi-chain strategy should be?
So the multi-chain kind of strategy for synthetics really is having the exchange and the leverage trading in the future be on L2, whether that's like at the moment that's OVM, but on other L2s, and having enabling synth creation to happen on L2, which is a lot faster and cheaper, and then having that being able to be migrated like a bridge, migrated to L1s easily, for other L1 ecosystem, for them to use. And I think some other multi-chain kind of things that we could consider is obviously having bridges. So, maybe more actively bridging synthetic assets to other chains. If that's kind of like, we've seen that how DAI's been bridged to many places whereas SUSD could take on more of that role as well, being bridged and used in other platforms. And also, looking at how the whole synthetic asset generation, like the whole synthetic protocol, how that could be potentially forked onto other chains. And we could look at what's the collateral type, what's the collateral in those chains, if that was to happen, and how that would benefit synthetics. I think that's the multi-chain strategy I see synthetics taking.
Thank you, Jackson. Michael, question 6 to you.
Yeah, so the way I think about different chains or different layer twos is really just as different operating systems. And in the same way that it is a decision for an application to build for different operating systems, I think of decision about whether synthetics should build for different layer twos or different chains themselves is really the same question. And if you want to go and attract more users, you want to get access to new activity, or if there's a number of assets that are on a different L2, different chain, that would be sort of the decision-making process. But as it stands right now, I think, we're balancing that with implementation and difficulty and time to be able to get there. So it's just a question of time and resourcing and what the size of prize would be for doing so.
Thank you, Michael, for your comments and analysis. Danijel, we'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
Thank you. I think it's a great question. I think synthetics should support multiple chains, all the EVM compatible chains. Even the situation right now was kind of not what I expected, that there would be effectively 2 debt pools, and the process of migrating is still kind of tedious, kind of complicated, kind of expensive. So the long-term version should be like seamless bridging of synths. Maybe that's a bit longer into the future, but near term at least, SUSD, and again going back to the previous question where I believe SUSD should be the stablecoin, the decentralized stablecoin, which goes back to the origin of Haven, I guess, and synthetics. So yeah, making that bridgeable, even if without the exchange part across multiple chains, L2s, side chains. I think that should be the vision for synthetics.
All right, moving on to question 7. Have you ever formally voted no on a SIP or SCCP, and why? Jackson, question 7 will go to you first.
Yes, so I remember a case where I voted no was with the ETH wrapper, increasing doubling the cap, just because it seems like at the time that would have had a kind of negative effect on the whole debt pool without further consideration of that cap increase. So I was probably the first one in the council to reject that and raise it as an issue. So I think just understanding that there's issues of at the time to increase the ETH wrapper cap to a very large number, that would affect the debt pool.
I believe it was exactly the same situation for me, voting for not increasing the ETH wrapper. And I vaguely remember there being another situation, I think having to do with maybe fees, but those are the 2 instances where I voted no.
Thank you, Jackson and Michael. What about you, Danijel?
Yeah, funny enough, I also voted at least on one wrapper increase, the last one that was submitted by Caleb, that had it like going to the supply of half of the synths total supply. I also vaguely remember voting against one, I think it was a rewards incentive for the shorts or the loans that I felt should be halved and not as much. In general, without taking too much time, I wondered at times if it makes sense having 8 members where in every vote we all have the same vote. I guess part of the reason is that all the proposals are just being detailedly discussed before they are submitted, so there's not much contention when it finally reaches the vote. But yeah, I think it should be interesting, and it's part of, I guess, the reason we have 8 members, that there should be some diversity in how we vote on some proposals.
Thank you, Danijel. And to round out question 7, Kain, please share your response as to whether or not you've ever voted no on a proposal.
I don't believe so. I don't believe that I've voted against anything. I may have voted against an SCCP at some point. I seem to recall that. But no, I think primarily we've managed to. I think this is a sort of a procedural question as well, and I think Daniel kind of brought it up that like there is so much oversight in getting SIPs to a point that I think most people within the council have had a chance to provide feedback on the SIP or an SCCP before it even gets to the point of a vote, which I think speaks well of the process. I think we don't have a lot of contentious votes because we have a fairly rigorous process. But you could argue that maybe there's some kind of impediment to having a lot more proposals, although we've seen in other governance frameworks that hasn't worked out very well. So my view would be that I think the fact that we generally have pretty high consensus on proposals is a positive thing.
Thanks, Kain. It speaks to the development process of each SIP that consensus is generally achieved by the time the voting process begins. This next question is one for the group. Which synthetics products do you believe should be prioritized that will drive the most amount of transaction volume into the future?
Futures.
Same for me, futures.
Synthetic futures and leverage trading in that case, yes.
I mean, the answer is clearly futures. I did say I would like to see a diversity of synths also on L2.
Well, on this topic, the panel seems to be in full agreement regarding synthetics futures. And that brings us down to the final two questions. Question 9. In the last Spartan Council election and voting process, staker participation was only about 5%. Do you think low governance participation is an issue? And if so, how should it be addressed? Jackson, we'll hear from you first on this one.
I feel like the actual token voter participation is usually more of the active, engaged community who have been voting. So I'm not sure if the target of just increasing the number of token holders or making it kind of like compulsory voting would improve the voting. But I guess if we were to increase the participation, a lot of that can be done through communication, like what we're doing now, panels, and also engaging through different communication, like making it easier to vote, and also having candidates communicate what's their agenda or their kind of views, so that there's something for voters, for token holders to vote against. I think those are some of the ways we can increase voter participation.
Thank you, Jackson. Very interesting points. Michael, what's your take on this?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing for me. I think, there are different ways, mechanisms that we can either incentivize or require people to participate. I don't think we need to get to that yet, because I think the most active people are the ones that are participating. I think one of the ways that we can increase participation is just by making it clear what the vote is for, and how, the Spartan Council is controlling X, Y, or Z. And yeah, I think, other things like tooltips, banners, or just making people reminders that there is a vote going on, I think is important as well.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Kain, what are your thoughts on voter participation?
I actually think that we have pretty exceptional engagement in governance, given that we do have a delegated democracy. And I think that it comes from the fact that we have such an engaged community. When you look at the amount of noise in the space right now, I'm sitting here looking at a Discord panel with somewhere on the order of 200 Discord instances staring at me with various notifications. It's incredibly hard for people to be engaged in more than 2 or 3, to be deeply engaged in more than 2 or 3 projects. And I think that synthetics over-indexes massively on most people who hold the token being highly engaged in that project over other projects. So I think we're actually doing quite well. I think one measure that would be quite useful, though, is to look at, what is the percentage of stakers that are voting, and how much of the weighted debt is actually being put towards all the various, council elections. And I think that we should, definitely work on some things to improve that. But my personal view is that it's already very very good. The status quo is quite impressive.
Thank you, Kain. Seems to be a very positive outlook on voter engagement. Danijel, what do you have to say?
Thank you. In general, I think it is kind of a problem in the space that people kind of don't really get behind that those are governance tokens. It's still kind of a meme. I think the participation will pick up eventually. I think it's heading in the right direction. Talking about synthetics elections, it's been trending upwards, and I think that's the important thing. 8% is probably twice more than we had in the epoch before that. I'd rather take 8% of organic votes than what we try to do with forcing people to vote so they can claim their rewards, which effectively led to Kain having 70% of the votes. And this is a joke, by the way. But yeah, I definitely don't think we should be forcing people to vote. And part of the reason for the 8%, which I'm pretty sure about, is that all the candidates were great. Like, the council looked good in every lineup. So I completely understand that people can be laid back and wondering, like, why would I bother, right? I like everyone. Yeah, don't need to go to that other part of the DApp and click two buttons.
Thank you, Danijel. Those are really good points. The positive trend in voter engagement is definitely something to keep an eye on. For the final question, we're going to open up the floor to discussion about accountability. How are the individuals on the council being measured with regards to participation and performance? Is there an internal feedback process where non-performance or non-participation is addressed?
I think that's actually a brilliant question, and it's something that we might be lacking. We discussed a few times having a feedback loop. What we try to do is give people like an attendance record, who makes the meetings, which I don't think speaks that much. Like, you can, just click a button, you're in the meeting, doesn't mean you're active, even listening, let alone, participating. Yeah. And then we had some community members raising like the voters tally, who was active in voting, who wasn't. Definitely there should be more of a feedback loop, more transparency, and even, I don't know, like what's feasible, but having something like a grading system of performance, at least, engagement wise, I'd welcome that.
I mean, my view is I think that this process is part of that process, right? The idea of bringing in some kind of journalism process to, really ensure that the information that token holders need is surfaced. And I think that this is a component. It's not just performance, it's, views. We want, one of the things that I mentioned early on is I feel very strongly that it's my job to sort of represent the interests of the token holders who have voted for me. And they have some view as to the kind of approach that I'll take to governance, and I try to adhere to that. But I think it's also important that feedback loop happens so that they can see what my actual, what my actions have been over this epoch, and if they don't like what those actions have been, or they're concerned by them, they should not vote for me the next time. And if we don't have that feedback loop for them to know and understand what the decisions were that I made and why, then I think it's hard. And I think that wrapping that up towards the end of an epoch and presenting it in, a very sort of consumable package for voters right before the vote happens is probably the best thing that we can reasonably hope to do. And so I think that this governance, journalism process that we've tried to kick off with, SNXweave is a really critical component of governance to make sure that we're surfacing that information.
Fully agree there. I think this is also one of the data points that would lead to shorter tenure on council epochs. It's just if we're not seeing the feedback mechanism of getting people off who are not participating, then having them have less of a tenure is probably more important.
Put it this way, I'll be watching very closely to see what the outcome of this election is. And if it is what I think it is, then I'll have more concerns about the process than I do now. If it turns out differently than I'm expecting, as in, if the status quo of just voting in incumbents is kind of overturned and we see some new people coming in, that might be more likely to be active, then I'll be a bit more optimistic. But at the moment, I'm a little bit pessimistic about what the likely result will be. We'll see what happens, but it remains to be seen. I think there's a bit of work
Share
to do.
that pessimism.
Like I want to be optimistic, but I'm also realistic and slightly pessimistic that I think maybe this process will help, and maybe some other things can help. If they don't, then I think we just need to keep iterating and testing and finding ways. I think we all know that there needs to be some changes in the council. And I think if we don't see those changes happen, then it means that there's been a failure of the process. And so I think that will mean, when you really need to kind of take a hard look at how we're surfacing this information.
Fully agree.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your responses with regard to maintaining the accountability and performance of Spartan Council members. This brings us to the end of the panel interview. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks for listening. The voting period is now open, so be sure to get your votes in before September 30th. Once again, the full list of Spartan Council candidates include Afif, B. Barker, Big Penny, Boyan, Daniel, Justin, Kain, Caleb, Michael, Synthaman, and Terabellis. Don't forget to also cast your ballots for the Grants DAO, the Ambassador DAO, and the newly formed Treasury Council. Until next time, this is SNXweave.